Think about the last time you turned down an invitation. Not because you were sad, not because you hated the people asking, but because some quiet, stubborn part of you wanted the evening to belong to no one but you. If you have ever felt guilty about that, if you have ever wondered whether something is wrong with you for preferring a closed door over a crowded room, stay with me. Because what you are about to hear might be the most reassuring thing you learn all year. For most of human history, being alone was dangerous. A person separated from the tribe did not survive long. No one to watch your back while you slept. No one to share the kill. No one to warn you when the grass moved the wrong way. So evolution built a brain that rewards closeness and punishes isolation. A brain that releases comfort chemicals when you are surrounded by familiar faces and floods you with unease when you are not. That wiring is still sitting inside every human skull alive today. And yet somehow, some of the sharpest, most capable minds on the planet seem to have broken free of it. They do not just tolerate solitude, they thrive in it. The question that has quietly obsessed psychologists for years is simple. Why would a trait that helped our ancestors survive suddenly become optional for some people and not for others? In 2016, two evolutionary psychologists, Norman Lee of Singapore Management University and Satoshi Kanazawa of the London School of Economics, decided to test this directly. They pulled data from a massive American survey that had tracked more than 15,000 young adults, and they looked for a pattern connecting three things: how densely populated someone's environment was, how often they socialized with friends, and how satisfied they felt with their lives. What they found matched decades of prior research at first. People living in crowded cities tended to report lower life satisfaction than people in quieter, less populated areas. And people who spent more time with friends were, on average, happier than people who spent less time with friends. Nothing shocking so far. This is the pattern researchers call the urban-rural happiness gradient, and it has shown up again and again in survey data. But then Lee and Kanazawa split the data by intelligence, and the pattern broke apart. For people with lower measured intelligence, spending time with friends predicted happiness strongly. The more social contact, the higher the life satisfaction, almost like clockwork. But for people with higher measured intelligence, that link grew weaker, and in some cases nearly disappeared. The smartest people in the sample were not getting the same emotional payoff from hanging out with friends that everyone else was getting. Their happiness seemed to run on a different fuel entirely. To explain this, Lee and Kanazawa leaned on an idea called the Savannah theory of happiness, sometimes called the evolutionary mismatch hypothesis. The theory is built on a simple but unsettling premise. Our brains did not evolve for the world we live in now. They evolved for the world our ancestors lived in tens of thousands of years ago. Small nomadic bands on the African savanna, groups of maybe 150 people at most, where you knew everyone by name and your survival depended on constant cooperation. Almost everything about modern life, dense cities, digital communication, career ladders, algorithmic feeds, is what psychologists call evolutionarily novel. Our ancient brains were never designed to process any of it. Here is where intelligence enters the story. Lee and Kanazawa argue that general intelligence is not just about solving math problems or scoring well on a test. It is, at its core, the brain's toolkit for handling situations it was never designed to handle. Novel problems, unfamiliar environments, circumstances outside the ancestral script. If that is true, then a highly intelligent brain should be better equipped to navigate the strange, oversized, hyper-connected modern world without leaning as hard on the ancient social safety nets that everyone else still depends on. In other words, the pull toward constant company may be a leftover survival instinct, and the more capable your brain is at solving new problems on its own, the less urgently you need that instinct to fire. This does not mean intelligent people dislike other human beings. That is a common misreading of the research, and it misses the point entirely. What it suggests is something more specific. The reward that most people get from casual, frequent socializing, the comfort of simply being around others, seems to matter less to highly intelligent people, while their satisfaction becomes more tied to pursuing meaningful goals, ideas, and personal projects. Solitude for them is not the absence of something good. It is the presence of something they actually want. There is a difference worth pausing on here, because it matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. Solitude and loneliness are not the same experience, even though they can look identical from the outside. Loneliness is the painful gap between the connection you want and the connection you have. It is corrosive. It is linked to poor sleep, elevated stress hormones, and worse cardiovascular health. Solitude is different. Solitude is chosen. It is the deliberate act of stepping away, not because you are running from people, but because you are running towards something, a thought you want to finish, a project you want to build, a version of clarity you can only find in silence. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what he called flow, that state of total absorption where time seems to bend and self-consciousness disappears. Flow tends to happen far more easily alone. No interruptions, no social performance, no mental bandwidth spent managing how you are coming across to someone else. Just the raw, uninterrupted contact between your mind and the problem in front of it. This is where the story starts connecting to something you have probably already noticed in your own life, even if you never had a name for it. Think about the last time you solved a genuinely hard problem, wrote something you were proud of, or had an idea that felt like it came out of nowhere. Chances are it did not happen in a group chat. It happened in the shower, on a walk, at 2 a.m. with the lights off, somewhere quiet enough for your own thoughts to finally get a word in. Cognitive psychologists have long understood that certain kinds of thinking, deep focus, complex reasoning, creative synthesis require what is sometimes called cognitive load protection. Every person you talk to, every notification you glance at, every social cue you have to track and respond to consumes a slice of your limited mental bandwidth. Highly intelligent people, who often gravitate toward complex, effortful thinking, may simply need more of that bandwidth left uninterrupted, which makes solitude less of a preference and more of a functional requirement. There is also a metacognitive piece to this puzzle, meaning the brain's ability to think about its own thinking. People with strong metacognitive skills tend to be unusually aware of how their mental state shifts depending on their environment. Many describe noticing, almost like a switch flipping, that their thoughts become shallower and more reactive in group settings, and deeper and more original when they are alone. Once you consciously notice that pattern in yourself, it becomes very difficult to keep choosing the version of your day that makes you think worse. None of this means solitude is automatically healthy, and this is the part most videos on this topic conveniently skip. Psychology also warns us about the dangers of isolation taken too far. Chronic, unwanted aloneness is associated with increased risk of depression and anxiety, and some research even links prolonged social withdrawal to worse physical health outcomes over time. The line between restorative solitude and harmful isolation is not always obvious, even to the person living it. A useful gut check that many psychologists point to is simple. Does being alone leave you feeling recharged, clear, and ready to re-engage with the world on your own terms? Or does it leave you feeling numb, avoidant, and quietly relieved that no one is checking on you? The first is solitude doing its job. The second deserves honest attention, and possibly a conversation with someone you trust. There is a historical thread running through all of this that long predates modern psychology. Long before anyone ran a study on intelligence and life satisfaction, some of history's most original thinkers were describing the exact same pattern in their own words. Isaac Newton did much of his most important theoretical work while Cambridge was closed during an outbreak of plague, isolated at his family home with almost no social distraction for nearly 2 years. Charles Darwin, after returning from his voyage on the Beagle, deliberately structured his daily life around long, solitary walks, using that isolated thinking time to slowly build the framework for a theory that would reshape biology. These were not hermits avoiding humanity out of fear. They were people who understood, long before anyone had a scientific vocabulary for it, that their best thinking required room that other people's presence tended to crowd out. Now bring this into the present, because the pattern has not gone anywhere. It has just changed shape. Modern life is louder than it has ever been. Open floor plan offices, constant notifications, group chats that never sleep, a culture that treats being busy and being social as proof of a life well lived. For someone whose mind genuinely needs quiet to function at its best, this environment is not neutral. It is actively working against them. This is part of why so many high-performing, deeply thoughtful people describe a specific kind of exhaustion after long stretches of forced socializing, not sadness exactly, but a sense of static, of mental noise that will not clear until they get several uninterrupted hours to themselves. That is not antisocial behavior. That is a nervous system asking for the conditions it needs to reset. There is a quieter danger hiding underneath this whole conversation, and it is worth naming directly. Once someone discovers that they think more clearly alone, it becomes tempting to treat solitude as a personality trait to perform rather than a tool to use. Some people begin isolating not because it serves their thinking, but because it has become a comfortable identity, a way of avoiding the very real discomfort of vulnerability, rejection, or being truly known by another person. The research on intelligence and solitude was never an argument for cutting people out of your life. Even in Lee and Kanazawa's own findings, close friendships still mattered, and a small number of deep, high-quality relationships continued to predict well-being across every intelligence level they measured. What separated the pattern was not the total absence of connection. It was a reduced need for constant, low-quality social contact. Quality did not disappear from the equation. Quantity simply stopped being the thing that mattered most. So what do you actually do with all of this? First, stop treating your need for alone time as a flaw that needs fixing. If solitude leaves you clearer, calmer, and more capable, it is not avoidance, it is maintenance, and it deserves to be scheduled into your life with the same seriousness you would give any other form of self-care. Second, protect a block of truly uninterrupted time, ideally the same time each day, where your phone is somewhere else and your only job is to think, write, walk, or simply exist without an audience. Even 20 or 30 minutes, taken consistently, changes the texture of how your mind operates. Third, get honest with yourself about the difference between restorative solitude and avoidant isolation. Alone time should leave you feeling more capable of connection, not less. If it is quietly making you afraid of people, that is worth examining. And finally, protect the few relationships that actually matter to you fiercely, because the evidence is clear that even the most solitary, self-sufficient minds in history still needed somewhere to belong. Maybe the real takeaway here is not that intelligent people do not need others. It is that everyone eventually has to figure out their own personal ratio, how much of the world they need to let in, and how much quiet they need to protect in order to hear themselves think. Some people find that ratio tilted heavily toward company. Others find it tilted toward silence. Neither one is broken. Neither one is better. The only mistake is spending your life apologizing for the ratio that actually works for you. So here is the question worth sitting with after this ends. When was the last time you were alone and it felt like relief instead of loneliness? Tell me about that moment in the comments, because I have a feeling a lot of people reading this are about to realize they are not as alone in feeling alone as they thought. And if this kind of deep dive into how your own mind works is something you want more of, this channel is exactly the place to stay.